Hello, and welcome to Midnight Sleep Scientist, a small, warm light in a quiet room, where big ideas speak softly and nothing urgent knocks at the door. If you're finding the cool side of the pillow, or letting your shoulders slide down from your ears, you're already doing the science that matters most tonight. Breathing, in and out. No rush. Our gentle question is a curious one. Is our universe inside a black hole? Not a claim, just a night thought, a candle flame. Not a floodlight. Imagine a moonless sky that doesn't feel empty at all, only calm. Far above, the stars are steady pinpricks. Somewhere among them, there are black holes. Regions where gravity leans so deeply into the fabric of space and time that even light can't quite climb back out. We usually picture black holes as far away, compact, almost private. But a soft idea steps closer. What if the room we're in, the entire universe, began as the inside of one? Now breathe again. Slow and even. Let your jaw unclench if it wants to. Nothing sharp is coming.
To ask whether everything is inside. Anything sounds like a riddle, whispered through a smile. Inside suggests bowls and boxes, teacups and cupboards. Universe suggests all of it. Put them together and language wobbles a little, yet space-time can curve in ways that loosen the grip of ordinary words. Perhaps inside is not a smaller room within a bigger house. Perhaps it is a region with its own rules, its own clocks, its own horizon, a boundary of influence rather than a wall. A horizon, in this bedtime sense, is simply the place beyond which messages cannot return. From far away, it's a line between could hear from you, in principle, and probably never will. From close up, it isn't a wall, and it isn't a blade. You'd pass it the way a breath becomes the next breath, continuous, ordinary, and only later realize that all paths now tilt one way. Let's promise each other something. We'll be careful and kind with ideas. We'll use hedges, perhaps, maybe it seems, because the night prefers honesty. We won't sprint, we'll stroll. First we'll befriend black holes. Until the sharp words feel rounder, then we'll befriend the universe. Not as a homework problem, but as a rising loaf of bread, as a quilt slowly stretching, as a stage whose floorboards drift apart under the actor's feet. Much later, we'll set the two pictures side by side and ask politely, could one live inside the other? If you drift into sleep along the way, that's perfectly allowed. The questions will still be here when you wake. And if you're awake at the end and you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Our sleepy world map is a quiet joy. For now, hold an image. A broad hillside at night. The slope is gentle, so gentle you can forget it's there. Your town rests comfortably across its face. Balls placed on the grass roll toward the valley, slowly if they're far up, faster if they're nearer the center. In one friendly picture, gravity is the shape of that hill, geometry that invites paths to curve. When the valley is exceptionally deep, so deep the bottom is fog, the sides steepen until even light, the fastest traveller we know, leans in and cannot quite turn back uphill. That deepest shape is what we call a black hole. From the distant viewer's perspective, things falling toward the hole appear to slow. Their clocks lag as though time itself has turned syrupy. Their light reddens, stretched into longer, lazier waves by the climb it keeps trying to make. But according to the falling traveller's own watch, nothing peculiar happens at the threshold. A second is still a second. A heartbeat is a heartbeat. Two stories, each true in its own frame. This is one of the night's soft lessons. Perspective matters, and the math that cradles both views is gently consistent. Imagine, now, that you are the traveller. There is no jolt at the horizon, just a hush, a committing. Inside, hallways curve in ways that are hard to translate into kitchen language. Distances stretch in directions you didn't expect. Time and space trade a few social roles. If a black hole were a house, its entryway would be more subtle than a welcome mat. You'd cross it without noticing, and only later realize that every corridor bends you inward, however you aim your steps. Here comes the tender twist. In certain solutions of the equations that describe gravity, solutions drawn with careful chalk on careful boards, What looks like an ending from one vantage can resemble a beginning from another. A collapsing region in one description becomes an expanding region in a different chart of the same mathematics. Picture a bud that appears to close forever when watched from one side, while from another viewpoint it opens into a flower. This is metaphor, not proof, but it helps us hold a possibility without squeezing inside. Could be spacious enough to host an entire cosmos with its own galaxies, its own histories, its own quiet dawns. Never aware of the parent tree, a soft reset in 2, 3, and out 2, 3. The room around you is simple. The device playing this is only a lantern for a voice. You can let everything else wait outside. Words try to trick us here. Inside suggests smaller space-time, allows otherwise. You can have a region whose boundary, its horizon, cuts off communication without being embedded in a larger, walkable chamber in any ordinary sense. Think of a map that loops back on itself. You can stroll straight ahead forever and eventually return to where you started, never seeing an edge. In that spirit, an inside can be defined by the rules of reach, rather than by physical walls. If our universe were such a region, our inside would be the set of all events we could ever, even in principle, encounter. An outside might exist in a grander story, but no postcard could cross the boundary either way. In bedtime terms, if there is a beyond, it sleeps through us, and we sleep through it. Hold a second image behind closed eyes. A snow globe without glass, filled with tiny galaxies that drift apart because the space between them slowly increases. There isn't a literal shell at the edge. There's only a rule about what can talk to what. Light, launched from deep within, can journey for eons, but there is a horizon, near or far, beyond which messages simply can't get out. If a black hole seeded a region like this, the glass would be its horizon. Inside, ages unfold. Outside, there would remain only the faintest, fading whisper of the moment it budded. We should say gently and clearly what we do and don't know. Our confidence is sturdy about some things. How gravity curves space-time, how clocks behave in strong fields, what horizons do both in equations and in the observations we make of real black holes, humming, feeding and merging in distant galaxies. Our confidence is softer at the center, where calculations spit out infinities that hint at our description's limits. We don't yet know whether nature allows a bridge from collapse to birth, or whether quantum rules add the elasticity needed for a bounce, a gentle turn from inward to outward. Where the ground grows steep, we'll keep to a path with handrails. Simple analogies, careful language, rest stops, another breath. Long and unhurried. If our universe did begin inside a black hole, would anything feel different here? Would the night carry a different hush? Would the soft microwaves left over from our universe's earliest hot minutes, the afterglow scientist's map, carry a watermark, a subtle swirl, a quiet asymmetry from a parent realm? Maybe, maybe not. Later we'll explore what signs, if any, might show up. If this picture is right, for now, let the idea be a lullaby rather than a verdict. It gives us a gentle way to hold beginnings without panic and endings without doom. Notice how names shape mood. Black hole sounds like a stop sign. Universe sounds like everything. Put them together and the heart might brace. But horizons can be cradles as well as curtains. Darkness can be a room where seeds learn their shapes, and the everything we inhabit can be complete to us while still, just possibly, being part of a larger pattern, the way a single dream is complete to the dreamer, even though the dreamer is also someone asleep in a bed, in a house, on a street that glows faintly under the moon. You're doing beautifully. If your eyelids are heavy, let them be heavy. The mind can listen with them closed. Before we pause, a little roadmap in a whisper. In the next chapter, we'll settle into the home-like details of black holes, horizons that behave like one-way shores, time that stretches and bends, the gentle geometry that invites even light to lean inward. After that, we'll cradle a picture of the whole universe, expansion, cosmic time, the raisin bread image that bakers and astronomers secretly share. Finally, we'll invite the two pictures to meet and notice their family resemblance. Interiors, exteriors, horizons, beginnings that might be endings turned inside out. Along the way, we'll speak of information and area, of surfaces that seem to know more than they should, and of our mathematical habit of shouting infinity when what we really mean is our story needs a kinder ending. One last image for your pillow. Picture a calm lake, just before dawn. The surface is dark in a comforting way. Now and then a bubble rises from below, spreads a widening ring, and the ring becomes part of the stillness again. If a black hole is the lake, perhaps, only perhaps, our universe is one such circle. From above, it's a ripple. From within, it's all the water there is. And breathe. Let's settle in. Shoulders melt, jaw soft. A little space between the teeth, and breathe. In and out. Tonight, black holes will be nothing to fear, just peculiar rooms in the house of space-time with unusual acoustics. We'll knock gently, listen and step inside with socks on. Begin with gravity, not as a force that yanks, but as a shape that invites. Imagine a smooth bedsheet pulled taut. Place a warm teacup in the middle. The fabric dip, a wandering bead rolls past and curves toward the cup. Not because the cup reaches out and grabs it, but because the path the bead wants to follow straight as far as the sheet allows has itself been bent. In Einstein's bedtime story, objects simply follow the straightest paths available, and those paths curve when mass and energy tell space-time how to lean. A black hole is where that lean becomes decisive, the slope becoming a slide, the slide becoming something more like a one-way river. Now, a word that often sounds sharp, horizon. In this gentle framing, it's not a wall, it's a boundary of return. Inside that boundary, every possible path points inward. Outside it, there are paths that still lead out. If you were floating in the dark and crossed this threshold, nothing would sting or startle. You'd simply notice, a little later, that the list of choices available to you had quietly shortened to one, inward. In a universe that usually gives you a whole fan of ways to go next, that's the oddness of a horizon choice, narrows to a single thread. How big is this thread-drawing region? There's a simple way to picture it, one that doesn't need equations. Think about escape speed, the speed you'd need to throw something so that it never falls back. On Earth, that's a brisk 11 kilometers per second. If you compress a mass into a small enough sphere, the escape speed from its surface rises. For a certain size set by the mass, escape speed would match the top speed of light itself. That size is the black hole's not quite surface, the radius of the horizon. The details, if we drew them carefully, would involve the fine stitching of space-time. But the feeling is friendly. Compress enough and the inward lean overwhelms even light's best attempt to climb. From far away, the behavior near a horizon looks slow motion. Signals from a falling clock, beeps, flashes, arrive increasingly stretched apart. Light trying to climb out reddens and reddens, its waves pulled longer by the ascent. To the distant observer, the traveller appears to hover just above the boundary, dimming to invisibility as time seems to elongate like taffy. Meanwhile, on the traveller's own wristwatch, seconds tick normally. That paradox-sounding pair is common in relativity. Time is local and loyal. Your watch tells your time, faithfully, even when others, comparing to their watches far away, will swear you've changed your pace. Two stories, both true where they're told. Let's take a slow lap around the kinds of black holes nature seems to host. Some are the quiet endings of heavy stars, stellar mass black holes 10 times, 20 times the mass of the sun, formed when a star's inner pressures can no longer support its own weight, and the core collapses. Others are leviathans, millions to billions of solar masses nested in the hearts of galaxies. Their gravity shapes the orbits of nearby stars, and when they snack on drifting gas, a whirl of material heats and glows. The scene can become a lighthouse visible across the universe. Between the small and the giant, there may be a middle clan, intermediate in name and temperament, like river pools linking mountain rills to the sea. But that's a story still unfolding, and tonight we keep our edges soft. What about spin? Most black holes, like most everything, probably rotate. Spinning changes the interior map around a rotating black hole. Space-time itself is gently dragged, like honey swirling in a jar when you stir. Close enough, all paths are tugged around with the rotation. A region called the ergosphere, an energetic antechamber outside the horizon proper. The details can be intricate, but the mood is unchanged. Geometry sets the rules, and those rules say how clocks behave and how paths curve. If you prefer a watery analogy to honey, try a river with a quickening center. Far from the middle, you can paddle in place or drift outward easily. Closer in, the current nudges you downstream. Closer still, the flow becomes all there is. There is no paddling back to the bank, past the not quite marked place, where outward is no longer an option, and the river carries you on. It's not a moral story, just a map. Currents are geometries too, and black holes are currents in the fabric of where and when. Let's look, gently, at the view from the threshold inward. In the simplest, non-spinning case, the horizon is like a calm doorway. Cross it, and space and time trade certain responsibilities in ways that our homey language doesn't handle well. Distances measured toward the center begin to feel less like places you could go and more like moments you will meet. Saying this out loud can sound dramatic. We can soften it by remembering that up, down, before, and after are always in relativity, relationships rather than absolute. Inside the horizon, the geometry politely insists that the center is part of your future, the way tomorrow is part of your week. It's not a threat, it's a structure. We should talk about the center, but whisper. In many textbook maps, there's a singularity placed there, a point where our equations, which otherwise hume along like a lullaby, spike into infinity and fall silent. Infinity in this context is often a sign of nature's drama, but of our description's limits. The way a rainbow looks like it comes to a sharp end from far away, while up close it's only light and mist arranged just so. Many scientists suspect that a complete story, one that blends gravity's curve with quantum rules for tiny things, will smooth that center, perhaps replacing the hard stop with a bounce, a bridge, or some other gentling of the math. For tonight we don't need to choose, we just note that the sharpest word in the room might be a placeholder asking for a kinder, truer picture. You might wonder about the stuff that falls in. Does it vanish? Not quite the right question, perhaps. Nature keeps good books. There's a quiet and famous hint that black holes are not empty holes at all, but thermodynamic objects with temperature and, most curiously, entropy, a measure of information content that scales with the area of their horizon, not the volume inside. That's a detail for later, when we talk about surfaces that know too much and the hologram-flavored ideas that follow. For this chapter, all we need is the lull thought that horizons matter, not just as boundaries of return, but as tally keepers in the universe's ledger. Let's peek, without harsh glare, at what we actually see when we look toward a real black hole. We don't see the hole itself, we see its stage, gas, swirling toward the horizon, heats and glows. Magnetic fields can launch jets of particles that pierce the surrounding space like quiet beams. Against that bright whirl, strong gravity bends light into a ring-like silhouette, a soft-edged halo that sketches where the horizon hides. Even without the photographs and radio images you might have seen in daylight hours, you can hold a mental picture, a dark circle, not because something is painted black there, but because the paths that light would need to take to reach you from inside that circle simply do not exist. Let's soften another dramatic phrase: spaghettification, the stretching of objects by tidal gravity, an effect of the slope changing so quickly from head to toe that the body feels a gentle pull into length. The image is silly, the physics is just the old moon and tide story made intense. Near a small black hole, those tidal differences could be fierce. Near a very large one, the gradient at the horizon can be so mild that you might cross it without noticing, your entire body riding the same gentle curve. No alarms, just commitment. A pause. In, 2, 3, and out. 2, 3. Let the shoulders drop a little more. We can now sketch the life of a simple black hole in bedtime terms. Birth, the core of a massive star collapses, its inner regions, having exhausted their ability to push outward with heat and fusion, yield to gravity's steady invitation. If enough mass falls within the critical radius, a horizon forms, a promise that inward is the only future for things inside it. Growth, the whole can sip or feast on nearby material, but it is picky in a way. Only what crosses the horizon counts as dinner. Companionship. In galactic centers, many stars orbit the quiet giant, their speeds whispering the mass of what they circle. Merge, black holes can find each other, dance, and unify, sending out ripples in space-time, gravitational waves that pass through everything like a slow tide barely felt. Notice what's missing in this bedtime inventory: spectacle, fireworks, peril. Those exist in other contexts on other channels, louder ones. Here gravity is a gardener who knows one trick exquisitely well. It shapes paths. A black hole is a garden's pond with a current that can only carry you one way once you step in. Edges aren't walls, they are rules of conversation. Inside is not a cellar, it's a region with its own grammar. Why spend so much time on this calm tour? Because later, when we ask whether our entire universe might be the inside of something like this, we will need a tender familiarity with horizons and with how inside can be vast. We will need to be comfortable with the idea that what looks like an ending in one chart can play like a beginning in another. We will need to carry the feeling that time is local and loyal, that clocks live honest little lives even when observers disagree about how those lives compare at a distance. Before we close the chapter, let's return to a simple image you can carry into sleep. Picture a tranquil bay at night, far offshore. A current circles, slow but sure. Boats near the center are drawn along. From the beach, their lanterns appear to lag, to dim, to hang almost still as the current sweeps them away. If you were in one of those boats, there would be wind in your hair, ordinary chatter, a thermos warm sip, and the quiet recognition that certain choices row here or there have given way to commitment. That's a black hole's inside, not as doom but as geometry, a place where paths have agreed. One more breath in and out. Settle in, one easy breath, then another. Tonight, we're going to hold the entire cosmos in the palm of a quiet thought, not with equations barking orders, but with a few friendly ideas that scientists use when they draw a map of everything. No rush, soft steps, begin with a kindness. When experts say model, they don't mean a perfect copy, they mean a careful toy. A simplified world that captures the most important rhythms while letting the extra clatter sleep. For the universe, the most helpful toy is surprisingly modest. It starts with a polite assumption called the cosmological principle. On the grandest scales, the universe looks homogeneous, similar from place to place, and isotropic, similar in every direction. Not exactly, not on the level of trees and teacups, but on the scale of swaths of space, so large that thousands of galaxies would fit inside like sugar in a bowl. It's a bedtime assumption because it calms the picture. It lets us imagine that no corner is truly special, that wherever you are, the far view is more or less the same. From that quieting principle springs a soft frame, the expanding space picture. It's different from things flying through an already built room. Instead, the room itself slowly stretches. Picture dough warming in a kitchen. Raisins, galaxies, don't race through the dough. Rather, the dough between raisins increases. Hold two raisins far apart. As the dough rises, the distance grows, not because the raisins travel, but because the stage enlarges. If you prefer sky to bread, try the balloon image. Dots on the surface drift apart as the rubber inflates. No dot is the center on the surface. The center is outside the two-dimensional world. The dots inhabit. These are analogies, gentle and incomplete, but they help us keep our balance. The beating heart of this model is a single, time-shaped function, the scale factor, often written as a theta. You can think of a tar as a cosmic zoom level. When A is half as big, all large-scale distances in the universe are half as far apart. When A doubles, the vast separations double. The pace of this change is captured by h, tar, the Hubble rate, like a quiet metronome marking how quickly the cosmic room stretches right now. None of this requires loud math here. Just hold the idea that there's a dial telling you how expanded the universe is, and a tempo telling you how fast the dial is turning. Now, about time. Many kinds of time appear in physics, and it's easy to get lost. The universe model has a tender notion called cosmic time. Imagine sprinkling the cosmos with a very large number of patient observers, each drifting with the overall expansion, not hustling relative to their local neighborhood. Astronomers call them co-moving observers. Each carries a wristwatch that ticks according to the gentle unfolding of the universe around them. Cosmic time is what those synchronized wristwatches read. It's not your kitchen clock. Yours is influenced by your motion and by local gravity, but it's a helpful shared heartbeat for the large-scale story. Distances come in two flavors here, and naming them saves confusion later. Co-moving distance is a way to say how far apart two places are. If we factor out the current amount of expansion, it's the distance painted on the dough when you draw a grid that stretches with the dough. Proper distance is the actual stretch grid included at a given cosmic moment. Proper distance grows as a hetty grows. Co-moving distance stays put if the raisins themselves don't move inside the dough. The universe prefers the co-moving viewpoint for calculation because the grid moves with the flow. We in our imaginations can convert it back to proper distances whenever we want to know how far now. When we look outward with telescopes, we aren't seeing objects as they are now. We see light that left long ago, and the stretching of space has gently pulled that light to longer, redder wavelengths. This is cosmological redshift, marked by the letter Z. A small z means the light has been stretched a little. A large Z means the light has been stretched a lot. An ancient postcard whose colours have mellowed on the way. Redshift is essentially a measure of how much the room has expanded since the light set out. In bread terms, how much bigger the dough got while the smell of cinnamon travelled from one raisin to another. What about the shape of the room? Geometry has moods. The big model, sometimes called the FL Drodru picture, but we can let the initials NAP, allows three broad possibilities for the curvature of space on the largest scales. Flat, positively curved or negatively curved. Flat is like a cool tabletop that extends without bending. Positive curvature is like the surface of a sphere, where straight paths eventually meet again. Negative curvature is like a saddle, where geometry opens out in unusual ways. Observations suggest our universe is very close to flat, with generous error bars that invite humility. But for bedtime, it's enough to know that the model can handle all three gracefully, and that none of them requires an edge in the ordinary sense. You can have a finite space without borders, like the surface of a sphere, or an infinite space without borders, like a plane. Edges are not required. Rules. Now, we add ingredients to the dough. Different kinds of stuff influence the expansion in different ways, each with its own personality. Radiation, light, and other swift quanta thins out quickly as the universe expands, not only because the space between photons increases, fewer per unit volume, but because each photon's wavelength stretches, reducing its energy. Matter, dust, gas, stars. The quiet atoms in your blanket thins out too, but more slowly. As space expands, the same number of particles occupies a bigger volume. Dark energy, a term we use with gentle caution, behaves oddly. In the simplest picture, its density stays roughly constant, even as space grows, like a pressure that doesn't dissipate as the room expands. The mixture of these ingredients sets the tempo of a theta. When radiation dominated, expansion changed in one rhythm. When matter dominated, another, and in a late-time era dominated by dark energy, the tempo can speed up in a way that feels like the dough becoming springier. If you listen closely to the oldest light we can see, the cosmic microwave background, a uniform glow bathing the sky at a temperature just a hair under 3 kelvins, you can hear the universe's baby heartbeat, tiny mottlings in that glow, are the frozen notes of ancient sound waves that rippled through the hot plasma when the cosmos was young and bright. Those ripples tell us about the geometry, the ingredients, and the timing of the early expansion. But we don't need the data tables tonight. We only need a whisper of the idea. The afterglow is a memory woven into the light, and it fits the simple, large-scale model remarkably well. The quilt is smooth with a fine, purposeful grain. From small ripples, larger structures grew. Imagine sprinkling a still pond with the faintest breeze. Tiny ripples amplify over time. In the universe, gravity amplifies slight overdensities, regions with a smidge more matter than average, encouraging gas to collect, stars to form, galaxies to spin. The large-scale model gives the background rhythm. Local physics writes the melodies. Star formation, supernovae, black hole feeding, the dance of clusters. When we look far out, we also look far back, and we see galaxies at many stages of this slow choreography. It is all one performance, with different acts illuminated by the time it takes light to travel. A gentle, often misunderstood idea in the big model is the notion of horizons in cosmology. They are cousins, not twins, of black hole horizons. One is the particle horizon, the farthest distance from which light has had time to reach us since the beginning of the hot, bright phase of our universe. It's like the edge of your past light cone, the set of events that could possibly have sent you a message by now. The other is a cosmic event horizon, which may exist if the expansion keeps accelerating, a boundary beyond which events now will never be able to reach us ever, no matter how long we wait. These are not walls, they are rules about who can send postcards to whom, given the tempo of E and the speed limit set by light. Just as with black holes, horizons in cosmology are about communication, not about sudden cliffs in space. It helps to meet a few quiet distance notions that astronomers use because the night sky plays tricks with perspective. Luminosity distance is the one that turns a measured faintness into a how far, given a trusted candle. Angular diameter distance turns a perceived size on the sky into a how far, given a trusted ruler. In a static room, those notions would agree neatly. In an expanding cosmos, they part company in interesting, useful ways. The better to decode the story of us when certain stars type Y are supernovae, act like reliable candles, and certain ripples, baryon, acoustic oscillations, act like reliable rulers. The readings together hum a tune. The expansion is not just happening, it has changed tempo over time. Because the universe is expanding everywhere at once in this model, there is no single center. The balloon's surface picture helps. Every point sees others drift away, and each point can consider itself a center of its own observer patch. This is where language can lure us into corners. Edge, outside, beyond. These words work poorly when the stage itself is the thing that grows. If you feel a twinge of vertigo, that's only the mind's habit of wanting walls. Let that habit rest. The large-scale model is a way of saying, the stage can expand without needing a theatre around it. That's enough for sleep. We can whisper about a prelude too. Many scientists suspect that an earlier chapter called inflation smoothed the universe before the hot, bright era we can confidently describe. A brief spell when the scale factor grew with astonishing briskness, ironing out wrinkles and seeding the faint ripples that later grew into galaxies. The details belong to another night. The important bedtime feeling is this. The simple model we use now could have been set up by a still simpler story before, like a blanket laid neatly before you climbed under it. You might ask, where do equations live in all this? They are the grammar that insists these metaphors hang together. The equations connect the scale factor to the universe's ingredients, ensuring that if you change one, the other responds. They aren't tyrants. They're accountants, balancing curvature, energy, and expansion so that the story stays consistent. We won't write them down here. It's enough to know that a few lines of careful symbols checked against the sky's afterglow and the drifting of galaxies can describe 15 billion years of unhurried unfolding with astonishing grace. Let's soften a few common stumbles before they trip us later. First, expansion doesn't mean everything expands. Atoms don't stretch with the universe, Neither do people, planets, or even galaxies once they're bound together by gravity or other forces. The cosmic stretch acts on the largest scales, where the glue isn't strong enough to resist the room's slow growth. Second, faster-than-light recession of very distant galaxies is not a rebellion. It's a quirk of language. Nothing outruns light locally. Instead, the space between can grow fast enough that the proper distance increases more than 1 light-year per year. The cosmic speed limit still holds in each local patch. It's the bookkeeping of distance across many patches that allows those large numbers. Third, the observable universe is not the whole universe, it's just the bubble from which light has reached us so far. As time passes, our bubble grows, not into new territory like an explorer's ship, but as more distant light finally arrives. Now, breathe. In 2, 3, and out. 2, 3. Let that all settle. A tiny recap for the pillow. We built a toy that takes the largest view and assumes sameness on average. We let the room itself expand, guided by a scale factor that ticks along with cosmic time. We described distances that drift with the flow, and distances that measure the here and now. We nodded to ingredients, radiation, matter, dark energy, and to geometry's moods, flat, closed, open. We listened to the universe's baby heartbeat in the afterglow, watched structures grow from whispers, and met horizons that are really just rules about who can send a message to whom. The toy is simple enough to be soothing and surprisingly good at matching what we see. Why spend a whole chapter on this? Because in a moment, we'll invite another picture into the room. The inside of a black hole, as a place that might host an expanding region, with its own cosmic time, its own scale factor, its own horizons of communication. To compare those two stories without rushing, we first needed to befriend each one separately. Now we have one last image before we dim the chapter's light. Imagine a vast quilt being stitched in a quiet room. The pattern is regular, from far away, repeating motifs, gentle symmetry, but up close, each patch has personality. A galaxy here, a supernova's spark there, a baby star's cradle somewhere else. Expansion is the slow separation of stitches. Horizons are the limits of conversation across the quilt. Cosmic time is the steady thrum of the sewing machine, soft, dependable. The marvel is that a few simple rules can guide the whole quilt, and that by listening to the hum, we can guess the pattern. When you're ready, we'll step into the inside-out idea, with all this gentleness in hand. How a collapse in one chart can look like a beginning in another. Why some scientists whisper about baby universes, and how horizons rhyme across stories. Settle in. A slow breath. Shoulders soften. The day loosens its grip. We're going to take the picture we've been cradling. Black holes as peculiar rooms. The universe as a stretching quilt. And gently rotate it, like a mobile above a crib, to see how the shapes might align from another angle. Here's the quiet proposition. What looks like collapse in one description can resemble birth in another. Not a certainty, just a possibility. The equations allow us to sketch. Imagine a bud closing from the standpoint of the outer garden. Petals drawing inward, light shut out, everything narrowing toward a center. Now imagine standing inside the bud. From there, the very same motion feels like unfolding, space widening, room arriving, a first breath, 2 vantage points on one geometry. That's the inside-out idea in a bedtime shell. Let's ease into the map. Outside, a massive star exhausts its ability to hold itself up. The inward invitation of gravity becomes irresistible. The stellar core yields. A horizon appears. To neighbors, the story is a dimming, a red shifting, a slow freeze at the edge. But in certain continuations of the mathematics extensions that don't break the rules, one can describe an interior that has its own time, its own scale factor, its own sense of outward, that doesn't point back to the star, but away from a new beginning. If the outside sees a bud closing, the inside can experience a universe opening, quietly, steadily. In this picture, a black hole is not a hole punched in a sheet. It's a doorway that opens inward to more sheet, perhaps an entire quilt of its own. The horizon is the seam. On one side it's the edge of return, on the other It's the past boundary of a new region, like a sunrise you can't look beyond because there was no before inside that room. The seam isn't a wall, it's a rule about who can talk to whom. As before, the night keeps us honest. This is an allowed story, not a proven one. We walk it softly. You might have heard the phrase white hole, a time-reversed cousin of a black hole, that in pure mathematics can be thought of as a region from which things can leave, but into which nothing can enter. In an inside-out tale, the early moments of our universe carry a white hole flavor, not because matter is spraying violently from a nozzle, but because, inside the new region, the past points toward a boundary that can't be crossed in the other direction. From within, that boundary looks like a beginning, a horizon you can't peel back, a first page without printed words on the reverse side. From without, if you could stand outside and see the whole construction, it would look like a black hole that formed from two perspectives. One stitched fabric, another breath, in and out. Let language loosen.
Why bother with such a story? Because it softly answers an old riddle. Where did our beginning begin? In the simplest cosmology. The movie starts with a hot, dense state that we call the beginning. Not necessarily a point, not necessarily an absolute nothing to something, but a boundary to the past for anyone in our region that can feel unsatisfying, like a book missing its prologue. The inside-out idea offers a different mood. Perhaps our beginning was someone else's ending, not an end in doom, but a folding that became an opening. It moves the question without erasing it, and sometimes that's progress. Even in bedtime stories, moving a puzzle to a gentler shelf can help us sleep. Let's stroke the edges of a few variants without waking the cat. One version imagines that when matter collapses, the fierce conditions near what classical maps would label a singularity awaken, quantum rules that refuse to let distances shrink to absolute nothing. Instead of a hard stop, there's a bounce, a tiny but decisive reversal from in to out. In the outer chart, everything still falls inward. The horizon still forms. No signal escapes. In the inner chart, a small region stops contracting, turns around and begins to expand. That expansion quickly becomes the only story inside. Clocks their tick forward into a growing cosmos. The seam remains one way. Nothing from the inner world can leak out into the parent. For the child universe, the parent is not an outside, so much as an unreachable past condition, like soil once pressed around a seed. Another variant gently braids in spin. If the collapsing matter carries angular momentum, the interior geometry can become more complicated. No need for details tonight, but certain maps then allow corridors that behave less like a dead end, and more like a bridge. Whether those corridors are safe, stable, or even physically realized is a daylight debate among experts. For bedtime, the image is enough. Sometimes a knot tightens into a loop, sometimes a loop opens into a new thread. There are also whispering ideas about cosmic natural selection, where black holes sprouting baby universes become a kind of garden process. Regions that make more black holes reproduce more, filling an abstract family tree of universes with many branches. It's an imaginative lens rather than a proven frame, but it adds a quiet feeling of continuity. Stars die, black holes form, new regions bud, stars are born there, and the great wheel keeps turning, like a slow waltz heard through walls. A pause to diffuse the loudest word, singularity. In classical maps, that label marks where densities and curvatures race to infinity. Infinity, in physics, is often a flare that says, our description has left the paved road. Many suspect that once quantum rules are invited in, tiny, jittery, respectful of uncertainty, the infinite spike smooths to something finite, perhaps an ultra-dense, ultra-brief phase that redirects the story. If so, then singularity won't be a place you could visit. It will be the sign on an old map that gets replaced when we draw a better one. In that improved sketch, inside out is easier to draw. Collapse flows into bounce. Bounce flows into expansion. Expansion grows a cosmos where beings ask bedtime questions. You might wonder, if our universe is inside something's horizon, why doesn't it feel cramped? Because inside, here isn't smaller, inside larger, like a teacup in a cupboard. It's self-contained,
a region with its own causal structure, its own rulers and clocks, its own horizon that governs communication inside it. Once the expansion inside gets going, distances can become vast very quickly. Galaxies can form, clusters can dance, and everywhere there can be local rooms that feel as open as any night sky you've ever seen. Inside you don't see the parent, you see your own horizon, your own afterglow, your own quilt. We should keep a tenderness toward tests, even at night. If such inside-out births were the rule, might there be fingerprints, perhaps certain statistical patterns in the oldest light, perhaps subtle limits on how information is counted at horizons, perhaps features in the way expansion began that hint at a bounce rather than a hard start. None of these are bedtime certainties. They're lull ideas we'll return to when we talk about surfaces and information in the next chapter. For now, the important thing to carry is the rhythm. Horizons tally, surfaces matter. Area shows up where you'd expect volume. That rhythm, oddly enough, hums both in black hole physics and in the large-scale story of the universe. Another breath, in 2, 3, and out, 2, 3. Let your jaw unclench a little more. It can help to hold a picture that isn't cosmic at all. Think of a quiet theatre. Outside the door, a previous play ends. Applause fades. The curtain falls. Ushers collect programs. The house lights come up. From that vantage, the evening is over. But on the other side of a backstage door, stagehands are already setting a new scene. A different audience, in a different house, will experience a fresh beginning, unaware that their opening night was prepared in the afterglow of a previous performance. The door is our horizon, the plays are our regions. The theatre district, if there is one, never needs to be mapped for each audience to have a complete experience. Another small kindness to our language. When we say our universe is inside a black hole, the picture tempts us to ask, inside what? As though there must be an enclosing space that a cosmic tourist could visit with a camera. The concept doesn't require that. Inside names a causal interior, defined by what can send signals to what. It's a relationship carved by geometry. If there is a parent, its outside might not be a place our meanings can reach, and that's okay. Bedtime is a place to practice comfort with limits. Let's hum through a miniature sequence, step by gentle step, like a children's book for very patient adults. A heavy star yields, a horizon forms. Outside, the star's story ends. Inside, a tight region contracts further, then under rules we're still learning, refuses to compress to nothing. A bounce replaces a crash. The tiny region starts to expand. Expansion quickly becomes the only story for those within. Cosmic time is born there, and a scale factor ticks open like a flower. Structures condense out of ripples. Stars ignite, questions learn to ask themselves. The seam, once a black hole horizon in the parent, becomes from the inside viewpoint, a one-way past boundary. No postcards cross. Complete worlds unfold on both sides, each complete to itself. If you want a softer picture, a lake at night again, a bubble rises from the depths and pops, not explosively, but as a widening ring that merges into the calm, to a fish down below. The ring is a new world's widening shoreline. To the heron above, it's a small circle that fades. Both are true in their own frames. Neither invalidates the other. We should give the floor to a friendly skeptic, because bedtime stories are healthiest when a gentle critic tucks them in. The skeptic might say, "Lovely, but how do you keep the seam from tearing? How do you reconcile the bookkeeping of energy and information between parent and child? How do you stabilize bridges that classical maps say should pinch off?" These are good questions. In daylight, some of them are framed in careful technical terms. At night, we acknowledge that the strongest answers likely live where gravity's curve and quantum's jitter learn to sing together. Our task here isn't to prove, but to prepare, to notice how horizons talk like librarians, how surfaces count like ledgers, and how that shared language could be the thread between collapse and creation. A small preview whisper for where we're headed next. Black holes seem to keep their deepest accounts on their surface area, an almost mischievous twist that says The more room you have on the boundary, the more ways your interior can be. This idea, when held softly, hints at a world where information is stored on edges. If a universe can emerge as an interior, and if interiors are governed by their horizons, perhaps the seams themselves carry the recipes for what unfolds within. That's the hologram hint, and it's gentle enough for a lullaby if we dim the lights and keep the metaphors warm. One more breath, in and out. Let the eyes close if they haven't already. A tiny recap for the pillow. The inside-out idea says that a collapse seen from one chart may look like a beginning from another. Horizons are seams, not walls. They're rules about conversation. A supposed singularity might be replaced by a bounce, smoothing the harshest word in the room. Child universes would be self-contained, complete to themselves, unable to send or receive messages through the seam. Whether nature truly does this remains an open question. But as a way to hold wonder without alarm, the idea is surprisingly kind. A breath first, in and out. Let your shoulders drop a little farther. Tonight we'll sit with a curious, almost mischievous idea that in some of the universe's strangest rooms, the surface remembers more than the inside. It sounds upside down, but it arrives quietly, with the patience of a librarian at closing time. Begin with a horizon, not a wall, a rule about who can speak to whom. In daylight you'll hear that when something crosses a black hole's horizon, the horizon grows, its size, its area expands by a tiny measure that depends on what fell in. You don't need equations to feel the mood. Add a book to a library, and some shelf expands. The shelves in this story are not within the stacks, they are the boundary itself. Another breath. Let the idea settle. Area keeps the tally. Physicists have a bedtime word with surprisingly gentle meaning. Entropy. Think of it as how many different internal arrangements could give the same outward look. A messy closet behind a closed door has higher entropy than a neatly arranged one. Both can present the same calm hallway. Now the twist. For black holes that measure, the number of possible insides that would look identical from outside, seems to scale not with the volume you imagine inside the hole, but with the area of its horizon. The door's size, not the closet's cubic space, counts the possibilities. Pause there. That sentence is a lullaby, all by itself. Area, not volume. A surface whispering the richness of an interior. There's more softness around this. Black holes act like thermodynamic objects. They have a temperature, albeit a very low one for large holes, and they can, in principle, radiate faintly, as if their horizon has a subtle warmth. The details are intricate. Tonight we only keep the picture. Horizons are not just boundaries of return. They are also ledgers, bookkeepers, tiny accountants of what has happened and what could happen. If that's true, then information, the fine-grained details of what fell in, may be, in some sense, encoded on the horizon's surface, woven into the way the boundary itself is arranged, like handwriting on the seam. Not that you or I could read it, but that nature can, at least in principle, keep perfect books, with no page truly lost. There is a famous debate by day. Does information disappear when a black hole fades? But at night we can hold the gentlest version. Perhaps nothing is truly unremembered. Perhaps the surface knows. One more breath. In, 2, 3, and out. 2. Let's carry the library image a little farther. Imagine the horizon as a very fine tapestry, every thread a quantum stitch. When something falls in, a pebble, a photon, a postcard from a star, the tapestry rearranges just slightly. From far away, you never see the pebble again, but the tapestry's pattern has changed, and if you could count the threads perfectly, you'd find the story still present in the total weave. The interior may be cut off from our conversation, yet the boundary is humming with a record of what has transpired. This surface remembers. Mood shows up beyond black holes too. In a universe like ours, expanding gently, perhaps with a mild, late-time push, there can be a cosmic event horizon, a boundary beyond which events now will never send us light, no matter how patient we are. That horizon is different from a black hole's, yet it too seems to carry an entropy proportional to its area. Different theatre, same librarian's tone. Edges keep accounts. Now we reach for the hologram hint. If you've ever tilted a little holographic sticker and seen a three-dimensional image arise from a thin sheet, you've met the metaphor. The full 3D image is somehow encoded on a 2D surface in certain carefully drawn theoretical worlds. A similar miracle seems possible at a profound level. The physics in a volume can be completely mirrored by a theory living on its boundary. Two descriptions, exactly equal in content, one dimension apart, like a story told in prose and again in poetry, different rhythms conveying the same meaning. We don't need the equations or the specific landscapes where this mirroring is best understood. For our sleepy purposes, it's enough to hold the vibe. Sometimes nature writes the book of a room on the room's edge. Back to our inside-out idea. If a black hole's horizon in a parent world is the seam through which a child universe buds, then perhaps, only perhaps, the recipe for what unfolds inside the child is, in some deep accounting, present on that seam. That doesn't mean our sky is painted on some literal shell. It means that the rules governing our interior could be tightly linked to what a boundary knew at the birth. Inside we experience galaxies, seasons, lullabies. Outside, a horizon grows and keeps count. Two vantage points, one conserved story, a gentle grounding image. You're looking at a soap bubble catching moonlight. The bubble's skin is microscopically thin, yet the colors and ripples on it tell you about the pressures inside and out. Set a grain of dust on the film. It changes the tension and the colors rearrange. You still can't see the grain directly from across the room, but the surface has absorbed the news. Now picture the bubble expanding into a larger bubble, a whole new sphere forming beyond a neck. The neck, the seam, keeps the record. The new bubble inside never sees the old room, and the old room can no longer see the inside. Yet the surface between them knows both worlds by the way it bends. We're walking close to the big daylight puzzle people call the information paradox. The worry that if black holes can evaporate away through faint radiation, the detailed information about what fell in might be erased from the universe's books. At bedtime we won't fight. We'll notice the consensus tendency. Nature in every other context we trust hoards information carefully. It's not reckless with its receipts. The hologram hint says, keep an eye on the edges. The edges are where the receipts live. Another breath. Let your tongue rest from the roof of your mouth. Jaw loose. Good. Edges counting possibilities leads to a soft corollary. More area, more ways to be. When two black holes merge, the total horizon area after is not less than the sum before. The ledger doesn't shrink. The library doesn't lose shelves. It's an arrow of time feeling, written in geometry. There's a kinship here with everyday thermodynamics, where heat flows the way it does, because there are simply more ways for things to be jumbled than for things to be exquisitely arranged. A horizon's area, swelling, is like a guarantee that the book of potential pages only grows. It doesn't say which story will be told next, only that there are more ways to tell it. You might ask, how could a thin surface carry enough detail to describe an entire interior? The hush answer is that thin is a word from our kitchen. At very fine scales, a surface can be densely storied, with each tiny patch able to hold a minuscule bit of information, like sequins on a dress that, from afar, looks smooth. Count enough sequins and you can encode a great deal. In the hologram hint, the sequin count goes with area, so adding surface makes room for more narrative. Let's tuck this back into our universes within universes lullaby. Suppose a parent star collapses, a horizon forms, somewhere inside the mapping turns, and a child region begins to expand. If horizons keep books in area units, then the seam that divided parent and child may have carried a recipe-like encoding of what the child could become. Its possible ripples, its allowable tunes, not a script with every line predetermined, but a menu of legal outcomes. What kinds of particles may exist, how space may curve, which patterns of early ripples are on the table. Inside, we experience one such outcome as reality, not as a menu, the way a lullaby becomes the only song in the room when you close your eyes. We should be kind to skepticism again. A careful voice will say, beautiful metaphor, but which boundary? Which theory? What about universes like ours that look more like a calm, gently accelerating de Sitter space than like the special math worlds where the hologram is best understood? Good questions. Bedtime admits that the hologram hint is a direction, not a completed map, but the pattern that edges act like librarians, keeps returning in different theaters, black holes, cosmic horizons, even the entanglement structure of quantum systems that aren't gravitational at all. When one pattern appears in many plays, it's worth saving a seat for it. A tiny, tactile exercise for the pillow. Touch the bedsheet near your hip. Imagine every square centimeter is a little notebook. When the wind outside knocks a small branch against the window, tick, tick, the sheet's notepads record the tiniest tremor. The rooms on either side of the wall cannot hear each other, but the doorframe creaks, and in that creak both rooms are remembered. That doorframe creaking softly is the horizon in our analogy. The notes it holds are not rumors. They are the book of what has touched it. Another breath, in and out. You're doing wonderfully. A recap to take into drifting. Horizons aren't just no return signs. They are surfaces that count. For black holes, they count. The entropy scales with area. A hint that the boundary encodes the interior's possibilities. There are day arguments about how the encoding works, about how information avoids being lost when horizons change, about which precise boundary belongs to which interior. We don't settle them here. We cradle the shared melody. Edges keep ledger, and that melody hums in both the black hole picture and the big cosmos picture, giving our inside-out idea a quiet harmony line. Where do we go next? Toward the sharpest word that keeps trying to wake the room. Singularity. In the next chapter, we'll soften it. We'll explore how infinities in equations may be the mind's message, that our story needs gentler grammar, how bounces and bridges might replace hard stops, and how the night can hold unknown without fear. We'll see how smoothing the center makes the inside-out lullaby even easier to sing. For now, one last image. Picture a lantern held close to a thin curtain. On the curtain you see the dance shapes and motions that tell a whole story. You never see the lantern directly, you see its trace. A horizon is that curtain. The world beyond may be hidden, but the curtain carries the choreography. Perhaps our universe, if it budded from a deeper dark, carries its own dance on a seam we cannot touch. Perhaps that's enough to know the dance is recorded, that nothing beautiful is truly uncounted. And breathe. A slow breath, first, in and out. Let the day loosen one more notch. Tonight we'll sit with a word that often sounds like a thunderclap, singularity, and we'll place a soft blanket over it. No alarms, just a careful look at what the word means in our maps, and how the maps might be asking us to draw gentler shapes. In ordinary language, singular can mean unusual, one of a kind. In gravity's language, a singularity is not a glowing point or a physical splinter. It's the place where our description gives up. The equations that normally hum along, telling clocks how to tick and paths how to curve, reach a spot where they can't continue. In some charts, certain quantities we compute shoot toward infinity. In others, the trouble is subtler. Paths that should extend into the future or the past simply cannot be continued. It's like hiking with a good map and finding that the trail is drawn only to the lip of a fog bank beyond. The paper is unprinted. That's what singularity means in bedtime terms, where our map ends, not necessarily where nature ends. Another breath. In. 2, 3 and out. 2. Why do our maps stop? Often because we've told a story with incomplete rules. Gravity's big map, the one that curves space-time, is a classical map, which means it treats matter and energy as if they were smooth and certain at every point. But in the small, nature is not smooth and certain. It is grainy and hesitant. Quantum rules add a shimmer of uncertainty that paradoxically stabilizes many things. Atoms don't collapse because electrons live in fuzzy orbits that won't allow it. Light and matter borrow and repay, tiny instants of energy fluctuation in ways that keep the overall books balanced. When we insist on driving gravity's smooth map all the way to where densities and curvatures would be unimaginably extreme, it's unsurprising that the paper tears. The singularity may be less a physical spike and more a note from the universe. Please invite quantum rules to the drafting table. There's an old, careful daylight result proved with gentle ferocity by brilliant minds that says roughly, if gravity obeys certain reasonable energy conditions, and if space-time focuses paths the way positive mass normally does, then incompleteness of paths is inevitable, in collapse, and perhaps even in cosmic beginnings. That's the formal way of saying, if you keep only the classical rules and push hard enough, your map will end. It's not doom, it's a reminder. You need a fuller story. Let's soften an image that often tries to be scary. Infinite density. In a kitchen, infinite density is nonsense. You can't pack flour into zero volume. In equations, infinity is a signal flare. It means we have asked a formula to speak outside its domain of trust. A child's arithmetic can divide by numbers, but if you ask it to divide by zero, it shrugs and throws up smoke. Similarly, gravity's classical formula asked to describe places where their assumptions crumble. Shout infinite to tell us, wrong tool, wrong scale. That shout can wake the night. We will thank it, lower the volume, and reach for softer tools. What could a gentler center look like? There are several lullaby possibilities, all wearing hedges perhaps, maybe seams. One possibility is that extreme compression triggers a pressure born of quantum behavior, a stiffness that refuses to let distances shrink below a tiny natural measure. You don't need to memorize that measure, it's just very, very small, so small that our daily world never notices. But at the heart of a collapsing core, that smallness might suddenly matter. Instead of collapse to nothing, the story turns into collapse to smallest, then bounce. Imagine cupping your hands around a springy seed. Squeeze and it compresses. Squeeze harder, and at some point the spring stiffens and pushes back. The next motion isn't further inward, it's out. In a gently told cosmic story, that outward turn is the opening of a new region, the beginning seen from the inside. Another possibility replaces the idea of a sharp core with a softened interior, not a point but a tiny finite ball, where the interior pressure or geometry becomes exotic in a controlled, law-abiding way. Outside, the black hole behaves as usual. Inside, no quantity actually diverges. The scary spikes have been rounded. We need no equations tonight. Only the feel. The curve at the center is smoothed the way a master woodworker rounds an edge that might have snagged your sweater. There are also bridges in some maps. Corridors sometimes called throats or tunnels in daylight. Discussion. The classical versions of these bridges are fragile, like soap films. Beautiful, symmetrical, and quick to pinch off if you jostle them or try to pass through. But when we imagine the texture of space-time as subtly quantum, threads that can fluctuate and weave, some thinkers wonder whether certain bridges could be stabilized or reinterpreted. Not as traversable tourist routes from one room to another. Bedtime does not promise shortcuts, but as ways the interior bookkeeping remains consistent, or as mathematical correspondences between different descriptions of the same story. For sleep, the image is enough. Where classical paper crumples to a point, a richer fabric might instead fold into a narrow but finite pleat. A breath, jaw loose, tongue resting from the roof of the mouth. Good. A friend of softening is cosmic censorship, a phrase that sounds stern, but is actually protective. It's the hunch backed by much evidence in the tame cases we can analyze that nature hides the worst of her singular behaviors behind horizons. If true, then whatever unruly arithmetic lives near the would-be center doesn't leak mischief into the outside world. The horizon is the curtain. The play behind it can be rewritten without spoiling the audience's experience in front. At night, this is comforting. The universe keeps its most unruly math backstage. What about time near the softened center? In the strict classical script, the interior of a simple black hole flips 10 rolls. Marching inward becomes akin to marching into tomorrow. If a bounce occurs, then the interior's tomorrow gently becomes an elsewhere, a region that opens, making room for a new definition of time along with it. You don't need the exact choreography. Think of a staircase that spirals in tight, then opens into a wide landing with windows. You are always moving forward on the steps. Suddenly forward takes you into light. Let's return softly to the big cosmos story. The earliest moments of our universe, when traced backward with classical rules, lead toward a compressed hot beginning. If we carry our softening tools there, the beginning need not be a hard wall. It can be a turn. The equations whisper that when densities are enormous, new pressure-like terms could appear. The scale factor that was shrinking in the past tense can reach a smallest size and then grow. That's a bounce cosmology in cradle terms. Yesterday's in-breath becomes today's out-breath. No infinite spike, just a tiny sacred pause where the story changes direction. You might ask, does softening erase mystery? Not at all. It preserves wonder while trading alarm for structure. We still don't know which softening nature chooses. Bounce, bridge, rounded core, something we haven't named, but each alternative changes the inside-out tale. From ending becomes impossible to ending becomes passage. Letting collapse there be birth here without demanding infinite anything. A gentle skeptic might visit again. Even if the center is softened, how do we keep faith with the laws we trust? The conservation of energy, the careful bookkeeping of information, the quiet growth of horizon area. Bedtime answer. Any softening that earns our trust will have to respect those ledgers or explain exactly how they're amended. This is where last chapter's surface accounting is a guide. If horizons keep the books in area units, then a softened center must fit with the growth of those books. Many speculative pictures do, some do not. The ones we keep on the nightstand are the ones that tuck neatly into the librarian's ledger. Let's hold an everyday analogy. Picture the drain in a bathtub, viewed from above, to a soap bubble skimming the surface. The drain's throat looks like a place where paths converge and vanish. If you restrict yourself strictly to surface rules, to a two-dimensional map, the mathematics of flow might declare a singularity at the drain velocities rising, streamlines ending. But step back to the full three-dimensional room, and you see a channel carrying the water onward. The surface description wasn't wrong. It was incomplete. It reached the edge of its domain. Likewise, singularities in the classical surface map of space-time may be drains in a deeper plumbing, a reminder that we modeled with too few dimensions of rule, not necessarily that the universe itself terminates. Another breath. In and out. Shoulders soften. Eyes heavy. There's tenderness in how we talk about infinity. In math, infinity is a noble concept. In physics, it often signals a limit of applicability. When a rainbow appears to end at a sharp point in a field, no one races to where the colors hit the ground. We know the endpoint is a trick of perspective. In many places where infinities appear in physics, early models of the atom, for instance, better stories later rounded them away. That history gives us permission to expect that gravity's hardest spikes may also be warnings, not destinations. We can now tuck singularity softening back into our larger lullaby. If the center of a collapsing region is rounded or bounced by deeper rules, then the inside-out idea becomes easier to sing. The seam that is a black hole's horizon from the parent's vantage is, from within, the unreachable past boundary of a new expanding region. No alarms, no infinities, just two complete stories stitched together at a boundary that keeps perfect book. Outside, neighbors see a star dim and a horizon grow. Inside, beings like us someday look up and map a smooth afterglow, build telescopes and ask, where did our beginning begin? A small, tactile image for your pillow. Imagine kneading dough with a raisin inside. You press inward, the dough resists. For a moment it seems to tally toward a point, but the gluten network, those hidden threads, pushes back, and the pressure redistributes. The raisin re-emerges in a different place. The dough's surface smooths. No tearing, just rearrangement. Classical maps that ignore the dough's network predict a tear. The true loaf offers a bounce. The universe may be a master baker. Our equations are recipes still learning the texture of the flour. Let's recap softly, almost whispering. Singularity marks where our classical description ends, not where nature necessarily does. Infinities in the math are flares, not cliffs. Quantum rules, uncertainty, discreteness, new pressure-like effects may soften centers into bounces, bridges, or finite cores. Horizons remain kind librarians, keeping the ledgers as area grows. With such softening, the inside-out story collapsed there, beginning here, finds a cradle rather than a chasm. One last image before we dim the chapter's lamp. You're walking a coastal path in fog. The map shows a sheer drop where the land supposedly ends. But as you approach, the fog thins, and you see a gentle stair hewn into the rock, leading to a lower beach you hadn't known. The cliff on the map was a placeholder, drawn by someone who hadn't yet seen the stairs. Singularities are those placeholder cliffs. The stairs are the softer rules we're still discovering. And breathe. Long. Easy. Settle a little deeper, breath like a tide, in and out. Tonight we'll linger where endings turn into passages, on the gentle mechanics of a bounce, and on the more delicate notion of a bridge, not as stunts or shortcuts, but as quiet ways the story might move from collapse to creation, without a scream. Start with the feeling of a bounce. Picture a child's spring toy standing on the table. Push down, slowly, kindly. At first the spring yields with grace. Push further, and it stiffens. There is a moment when the spring's answer is no longer yes, inward, but enough, and now outward. In many lullaby versions of deep gravity, the fabric of space behaves a little like that spring, when pressed beyond the regimes our classical stories are comfortable with. The details vary, but the tune is similar. Compression awakens resistance, and resistance opens the door to reversal. One family of ideas imagines that at extremely small scales, the very geometry of space carries a kind of grain, like the invisible weave in a soft shirt. Try to crush that weave beyond a certain fineness, and you're not packing threads closer, you're pushing against the fabric's identity. The result could be a pressure that refuses any further inward march. From outside, our star still yields, a horizon still forms. Neighbors still see the dimming. From inside, in this telling, a tiny core halts and turns, beginning a steady outward flow that a blink later in local time is all there is to the interior, an expanding region with its own clocks, its own light, its own early warmth, and later skies. Another family of pictures charms the imagination with a slow cycle, contractions and expansions as alternating verses in a very long song. One verse might be dominated by smoothing forces, pressures that remove wrinkles so that by the time the turn arrives, the fledgling expansion is calm and nearly uniform. There's no need to swear to an eternal loop tonight. The bedtime spirit is gentler. Whether once or many times, the turn can exist without drama, like the soft pause between in-breath and out-breath. There is also the role of spin, quiet but consequential. Everything we know tends to rotate, and rotation makes space behave like thick honey in a stirred jar. It drags and swirls the geometry itself. At common scales, spin counters collapse. At very extreme scales, the story is more subtle, braided with the rules of quantum uncertainty that frown at trying to pin position, momentum, and rotation, all down at once. Some bedtime sketches suggest that angular momentum helps shape a path away from a sharp end, not by flinging matter out in fireworks, but by altering the interior map, so the center is less a point and more a region, where inward paths lose their nerve and begin to fan outward. A breath, shoulders soften. Good. Now, to bridges, and we'll move with caution. Say bridge, and minds conjure tunnels, doorways, passages you might walk through. The mathematics does entertain such shapes, throats connecting regions that would otherwise be separate. In their simplest, classical versions, these bridges are as fragile as soap films. Disturb them, and they pinch off. Try to cross, and they close like a sleepy eye. Bedtime does not promise traversable tunnels for weekend trips, but bridges can be meanings as much as roads. Two different descriptions of the same deep story can be linked by a correspondence that behaves like a bridge in the algebra, while never offering a tourist route in space. Think of it as two lullabies set in different keys that turn out to be the same song. There's a gentler, more poetic whisper too, that the invisible threads of connection binding far apart pieces of the quantum world, the ones that let them share odd, correlated fates, might, in some accounts, be cousins to the narrowest bridges in geometry. Not a footpath, a metaphor that hints that entanglement, the way systems can be intertwined in information, and curvature, the way space can be stitched, might be two sides of a larger fabric. If horizons keep ledgers on their surfaces, perhaps some of those surface threads are the very ties that bind the interior's possibilities into a coherent whole. It's an image you can hold without needing to choose a side. Knots in information, knots in space, one tapestry, another breath. In 2, 3, and out. 2. Let's walk the bounce more slowly, like a children's book for tired adults. A massive interior region yields to gravity, curves deepen, a horizon forms, pressures we understand, and pressures we're still learning about. Add together, near common conditions, the old rules dominate. Near extraordinary compression, new terms rise in the music. Stiffness from geometry's granularity, quantum pushback, rotational structure, inward slows, stops, and only in a tiny core at first. Reverses, the reversal grows. Inside becomes an elsewhere. The only paths are outward within that new region, and what was inward in the parent chart is now future in the child's. The seam remains one way. Postcards don't cross. Ledgers at the seam keep count. The child's early days are hot and bright, then spacious and cool, with ripples that condense into all the familiar scaffolding. Stars, worlds, nights like this. Listen for the arrow of time in this. Before the turn, both the outside and the inside keep proper books. A horizon forms and grows as its area increases, honouring the librarian's rule that shelves don't vanish. After the turn, the interior writes a fresh ledger. Its own entropy climbs as stars light and fade, as gas clouds collapse and disperse, as warmth becomes warmth spread widely. There isn't a reset that makes yesterday unhappen. There's a continuity of bookkeeping across the seam, a parent's horizon area tallying the possibilities that a child interior will gradually explore. We can bring bridges back in here, not as tunnels but as accounts that match on both sides of a boundary. If two stories are truly one fabric seen from two angles, collapse there, expansion here, then the numbers must hum the same tune. How many patterns are allowed? What information is preserved? Which symmetries are honoured? A bridge in this soft sense is a translation dictionary at the seam. Think of two families telling the same history in different languages. The bridge is the vocabulary that lets the dates, names, and feelings line up. There's also a bedtime notion of a black to white turn, a region that to an interior observer behaves like the time reversal of a black hole, not sucking in but pushing out in a measured way, as if the geometry itself had turned its arrows around. The outside sees only the growth of a black hole horizon. The inside lives the gentle bloom of a whitish interior past. The two agree where they touch, at the seams accounting. What would a bounce feel like from the inside? Not like a jolt, not like a wall crumbling. Imagine standing in a dark room and noticing that each step you take, forward or sideways, carries you into more room than before, as if the floorboards themselves are spacing out slightly under your feet. If you try to look back past a certain dawn, there's no earlier scene to see, not because a curtain is drawn, but because the storyboard simply doesn't have frames beyond that first page. You are not deprived. You are complete within your chapter. The parent's collapse is not part of your past. It is the explanation for why there is a first page at all. Now, a gentle skeptic enters again. always welcome. If something turns, what sets the turn's timing? What keeps the bounce smooth rather than chaotic? How do tiny ripples survive the turn to seed galaxies later without carrying violence that would wreck the baby room? Bedtime answer. The versions of the turn that people hold onto are precisely the ones that calm the interior's initial conditions. Processes that smooth and stretch, that take jaggedness and render it gentle. Some sketches propose a brief phase that irons wrinkles as expansion begins, shaping the interior into calmness without erasing the small, purposeful ripples that later grow into structure. The language is careful because the math is careful. The mood remains kind. Beginnings don't have to be messy. Another breath. Jaw easy. The mind can listen with eyes closed. Let's touch the question of traversal. Can anyone go from parent to child? The bedtime rule is simple. No, not because of rules invented to spoil adventure, but because causality, the order in which events can influence one another, is part of what defines each region. The seam marks who can talk to whom, and it says the conversations across are one way in bookkeeping terms, zero way in travel terms. If the universe is a library, regions are private reading rooms. The doorframe keeps perfect count of the books that went in when the room was stocked. The readers inside will never meet the librarians outside. And that's okay. Each room contains a whole story of its own. We can also be kind to the idea of many buds on the same tree. If collapse can seed expansion, then in a galaxy with many heavy stars, in a cosmos with many galaxies, the family tree of regions could be lavish. That doesn't make any one region less complete. A garden with many flowers doesn't make any single bloom less of a flower. Each interior owns its sky. Sometimes bridges are drawn, not between two regions of space, but between two ways of describing one region. Imagine the child world written as a story about fields and particles filling space, and again as a story about a boundary with information flowing along it. If those two stories are truly equivalent, they are bridged. Each statement in one has a counterpart in the other. This kind of bridge is especially bedtime friendly because it replaces tunnels and traffic with translation. Doors that don't open still matter. They carry plaques with the same poem, one on each side. A small, tactile picture to keep under the pillow. You're by a calm lake at night. A fish below pushes a ring of ripples outward. To the fish, the interior of the ring is a growing world. To you above, it's simply a widening circle on the surface. If the water were a layered gel, perhaps a neck forms and a new bubble swells beneath the surface. Invisible from above, a world in its own right. The neck is our seam. The layers keep their ledgers. The ring's outward motion is the child's expanding scale factor. You watch the circle fade. The fish lives beneath a new sky. There's also the gentle question of the arrow of time through a bounce. We're used to time's arrow, aligning with the growth of disorder. Eggs scramble, perfume disperses, warmth spreads. If a bounce occurs, does time reverse? The bedtime answer is that each side of the seam carries its own arrow, defined by its own increasing ledgers. On the parent side, a horizon grows. Possibilities increase in the particular way. Black holes count them. On the child side, stars and structures proliferate, and entropy rises by the ordinary kitchen rules. No one's memories run backward. The book is bound, so that each chapter reads forward within itself, even if the binding connects the chapters in a way that would surprise a librarian from a smaller library. Now a tiny inventory of what bounces and bridges are not, to keep the room calm. They are not promises of escape from endings we might fear personally. They are not loopholes for dramas. They are not announcements that physics has already voted on a single picture. They are gentle possibilities, consistent with many things we trust, designed to replace a shouted infinity with a whispered, perhaps the map ends here, draw more kindly. In that sense, they are acts of mercy toward our own language. A last breath before we dim the lamp, in and out. A soft recap for the pillow. A bounce is a turn from inward to outward, invited by deeper rules, granular geometry, quantum reluctance to be pinned too tightly. Rotation structure, so that collapse there can be beginning here without a tear. A bridge can be a fragile throat in classical sketches, or more helpfully, a correspondence, a dictionary ensuring that the accounting at a seam matches on both sides. Horizons keep ledgers, arrows of time stay local and loyal, and no traveller crosses. The wonder survives. The alarm can sleep. Where do we go next? To the night's most practical whisper. If this inside-out story were true, even partly true, what might we expect to notice? Are there tender fingerprints in our sky? Statistical curls in the oldest light, patterns in how structures grew, limits on how smooth the beginning was allowed to be, that would count as a maybe rather than a proof. In the next chapter we'll walk through those possibilities softly, always with hedges and humility. Begin with the oldest light we can still cradle, the cosmic microwave background, the baby afterglow that wraps the sky in an almost perfectly even hush. If beginnings were a bounce rather than a brick wall, you might expect the afterglow to be astonishingly smooth, because turns that are gentle tend to iron wrinkles as they open the new room, and that is roughly what we see. A sky that is uniform to 1 part in 100,000, with tiny ripples, just enough to seed galaxies later, not enough to raise alarms. The bedtime read is modest. Smoothness is compatible with a calm beginning. It doesn't prove a bounce. It tells us a harsh, violent start is less likely than a lull. A breath first, in 2, 3, and out, 2, 3. Tonight's question is practical, in a sleepy way. If our universe were the interior of a black hole, if some parent collapse blossomed into our beginning, what gentle fingerprints might that leave on our sky? Not proofs, not thunderclaps, just soft clues that whisper, maybe. Now about those tiny ripples, the little temperature mottlings sprinkled across the afterglow. In many stories of beginnings, those ripples look like a random, nearly Gaussian field, the statistical equivalent of a soft hiss. A bounce-flavoured prelude might leave very slight departures from that ideal hiss, subtle fingerprints in how the biggest patches correlate, perhaps a faint suppression of the very largest scale ripples, as though the universe didn't have infinite time to coordinate them before the first page turned. Daylight debates those hints. Bedtime lets them rest as possibilities. If a child universe has only a finite past inside, it has only a finite capacity to synchronize the largest drumbeats. The result could be a barely noticeable quieting at the grandest scales, a lull at low notes, another breath, shoulders settle. A gentle clue might live in curvature, the way space bends on the largest scales. If our room were a bud inside a larger fabric, the interior's geometry could have been nudged toward flatness, like a bubble expanding until its surface feels locally straight. Many beginnings, not just inside-out stories, drift that way. Observationally, space seems very close to flat, with error bars that keep us humble. Bedtime translates that, as nothing fights the inside-out picture here. The quilt lies smooth within our reach. We might also listen for preferred patterns, delicate alignments, or asymmetries, because an inside-out beginning could have inherited a mood from the seam, the way wood remembers the direction of its grain. If the birth carried a faint directional imprint from the geometry of the seam, that could show up as a whisper of anisotropy, a tiny tilt in the statistics, so small it hides inside the noise. Whether any such tilt is truly there is a careful question for daylight. In pillow language, the most convincing sky is one that looks like a quilt, sewn by a very patient hand, almost perfectly even, with just enough irregularity to prove it's real. We can ask quiet questions about horizons too. A universe that keeps a cosmic event horizon, because its late-time expansion accelerates, has a built-in ledger limit, a maximum information capacity proportional to the area of that far horizon. If edges keep accounts, then our whole interior is a library with a finite number of shelves, an astronomically huge number, but not infinite. That limit would never pinch your day. It lives beyond all practical reach. Yet, The existence of such a gentle cap harmonizes with the librarian's rule we met before. Areas count, and the count is careful. In an inside-out origin, it's natural to have ledgers on both seams, the parent's black hole horizon and the child's cosmic horizon, agreeing in their shared accounting mood. Consider non-Gaussianities, little deviations from perfect randomness in the afterglow's pattern. Many simple smoothing beginnings predict that such deviations are tiny. An inside-out bounce that irons the fabric as it turns would likely be a member of that quiet club. Small deviations, delicate and well-behaved. A sky full of wild, irregular fingerprints would be hard to reconcile with a nursery that prized calm. The sky we have wears subtlety, not fireworks. What about gravitational waves, those slow ripples in space-time that pass through everything like a tide? A calm turn might set a very quiet background hum, a spectrum of waves that is soft at the grandest wavelengths. If we ever hear that ancient murmur cleanly, its shape might help us tell a hard start shout from a gently turned sigh. Bedtime keeps the verbs hedged. Could, might, perhaps. The universe is shy about revealing her baby pictures. We can also look at how structure grew, how galaxies cluster, how filaments thread the cosmic web. A beginning that starts with a finite, low jitter seed of ripples, and then lets time do its slow amplifying work, produces a web with a particular balance. Not too clumpy too soon, not too smooth for too long. Our survey's daylight projects that sweep the sky for red galaxies and whisper thin gas tend to find that balance. Again, not proof, but the right lullaby tempo. If a child universe inherits a menu of possibilities from its seam, the allowed patterns and particles and symmetries, then we might expect certain consistencies, the same speed limit everywhere, the same unbreakable charges, the same spectrum of light's interactions, the same shy insistence that nothing locally outruns light. We do in fact see a cosmos where the rules don't drift from place to place. That's expected in many origin stories, including inside-out ones. It reassures the part of us that likes the quilt to be stitched with one kind of thread. Another breath, in, 2, 3, and out. 2. A skeptic, our welcome night companion, might ask, could there be sharper signatures, a watermark that says made in a black hole, along the edge? Bedtime answers with kindness. Probably not a stamp, but perhaps a style. Imagine comparing two songs by their feel, rather than by any single note. A bounce-born interior often carries a style that includes almost Gaunia's ripples with tiny disciplined deviations, a very smooth opening, a tilt in those ripple sizes that encourages structure to grow slowly and well, and an arrow of time that starts warm and relaxes without drama. Our sky hums that melody. Other melodies can hum it too. That's why we say maybe instead of must. We can even ask, softly, about entropy, the universe's habit of increasing the number of ways it can be arranged. From the inside, the arrow of time points from a low entropy early state to a higher entropy later state. In an inside-out origin, that low entropy start could be the most economical arrangement allowed by the seam's recipe. A simple opening chord with just enough ripples to write a future symphony. That we find ourselves in a universe that began in such a special low-entropy way is a famous daylight puzzle. A seam that prescribes a tidy opening makes that puzzle feel less lonely. It's as if the librarian began our chapter with a fresh page and a neat margin. There's a subtler clue hidden in limits, in what doesn't happen. If an interior had easy two-way corridors to its parent, we might expect messy, untimely influences, random injections of energy, peculiar alignments, obvious scars. The absence of such scars, the ordinariness of our large-scale sky, is itself consistent with a sealed seam. Our room seems self-contained, its conversations local. In bedtime terms, the door is quiet, the hinges don't creak. Another breath, let your jaw unclench. The night is patient. Are there clues we wouldn't expect? Yes, direct signals from a parent. Messages across the seam are off the menu. Also, gross violations of the rules we see locally. Clocks that behave wildly differently in different places for no reason. Sudden tears in the ledger are not part of the inside-out lullaby. The child room has its own consistent grammar. If tomorrow we found a sky covered in glaring asymmetries, jagged relic walls, dramatic non-random signatures, we'd look elsewhere for origins. The quietness of what we actually observe keeps the inside-out story possible and peaceful. One more breath, in and out, a tiny tactile image for the pillow. Imagine a very old handmade bowl. From across the room, it looks perfectly round. Up close you notice the faintest fingerprint, the subtlest spiral from the potter's wheel. A universe born from a bounce might be like that, round to a lovely approximation, with fingerprints you can only see when you know exactly what to look for, and even then they are whispers, not shouts. A soft recap to take into drifting. If our universe were the interior of a black hole, we'd expect quiet harmony with many things we already see. Smooth early conditions, almost Gaugnier's ripples, a sky with no harsh scars, local rules that don't drift, ledgers that suggest edges keep counts. We might look for the gentlest deviations at the grandest scales, a background hum of space tides, with a calm shape, and statistical fingerprints so subtle they hide in the noise. None of this forces the conclusion. It merely says the inside-out story can live comfortably with the sky we have, and offers a few places to listen more closely. A breath first, in 2, 3, and out, 2, 3. Tonight we'll cradle time the way you might cradle a seashell, close enough to hear a hush that sounds like the ocean, knowing the shell is not the sea, but it carries its rhythm. The gentlest thing to remember about time is this: time is local and loyal. Your watch keeps your time, faithfully, wherever you are. Sit quietly in bed, a clock on the nightstand ticking in a small, patient voice. Somewhere far away, another clock ticks with equal sincerity. If the two clocks later compare notes after living very different lives, one in a valley, one on a mountaintop, one moving fast, one still, they may disagree by tiny amounts. Neither lied, both were loyal to their paths. That's relativity in bedtime clothes. In our story, inside and outside become different neighborhoods. For clocks, outside a black hole, an observer watches a traveler fall and seems to see the traveler slow as they approach the horizon, their light stretching redder and redder, their signals arriving farther apart. To the observer's eye, it is as if the traveler never quite crosses, like a leaf carried toward a fog line, dimming and dilating until it disappears into glow. Yet from the traveler's own point of view, time flows normally. Moments arrive with their usual soft weight. The horizon is crossed in finite, ordinary proper time. Two narratives, both true where they are told. The river looks slow from the bank, swift in the boat. Another breath. Let the jaw float loose. Inside the horizon, the map changes grammar. Directions that used to feel like places become times you will meet. The center is not a location you might visit if you choose, but part of your future the way tomorrow is part of your week. Saying it aloud can sound dramatic. We can soften it. Inside, all paths lean the same way in time. Choice narrows. Commitment grows. It's not a threat. It's a structure. Now place this next to our quiet big cosmos toy. On the largest scales we imagined cosmic time, the wristwatches worn by patient observers who drift with the expansion and do not hustle relative to their local neighborhoods. Those clocks give the universe a shared heartbeat. The age of the universe is the reading on that family of watches. Your kitchen clock is not one of those. It lives among local hills of gravity and small motions. But the concept is soothing. There is a time that belongs to the quilt of space itself, a slow drum that all commoving observers hear. If a child universe buds inside a parent's black hole, the seam creates a curious duet. The parent's outside observer may never see the traveler cross the horizon. Their chart assigns that crossing to never quite now. The child's interior, however, has its own cosmic time that begins cleanly on page 1, a first breath where the scale factor opens like a flower. The two timetails are not contradictions. They are two choirs practicing different verses in different rooms. The door between them keeps the beat consistent at the seam, but prevents the choirs from hearing each other's song. This is where words try to trick us. Before the beginning sounds like a sensible question, until we remember that before belongs to a particular clock. Inside the child universe, cosmic time starts at the first page. There simply isn't an earlier page in that book. Asking for one is like leaning toward the margin and insisting the story must continue into the binding. Outside, in the parent's time, the collapse had a long prelude. Both can be true. It's not nothing turned into something, it's one story's end became another story's first sentence, with the door between them refusing to pass notes. Another breath. In, 2, 3, and out, 2. Gravitational time dilation is the hush voice in all of this. Clocks lower in a gravitational well, closer to massive things, tick a little slower, compared to clocks far away in calmer space. You don't notice it washing your cup. Satellites do notice it ticking above Earth. Black hole edges amplify it into a near freeze, as seen from afar. Yet for each clock, time is smooth. If we could whisper to each clock in its own frame, none would report strain. I ticked, then I ticked again. Perspective breeds the miracle. Loyalty preserves sanity. Now fold in psychological time, the quiet cousin who shows up when the room grows still. As your breathing slows, subjective time often stretches. A minute grows roomy. That personal elasticity doesn't change physics. It changes experience. It's helpful because the mind's habit of clutching at before and after eases when we give it something cyclical to hold. Breath in, breath out. In a way, this mirrors what our cosmic maps do. They replace cliff edges of time with cycles and seams, with local clocks that mean what they say without claiming to be the only clocks. There's also the arrow of time question, tiptoeing around the bed. Why does time feel like it flows from ordered mornings to messier nights? From ice cubes to water, from warm tea to lukewarm. That feeling is our body reading the universe's entropy, the count of possible arrangements, growing. In a child universe, the arrow points outward from the first page, because the first page is simple, low entropy, clean, like a blank score waiting for music. As stars light and die, as structures form and loosen, as warmth spreads, the number of ways to be increased. The arrow is the slope of that increase. If the child began as a bounce softened by deep rules, then the seam simply guaranteed an 80 opening chord, no reversal. No rewinding, just a forward arrow defined inside the room. A pause. Shoulders soften. Good. We can smooth a common riddle now. If an outside observer never sees the crossing, how can the inside have a future at all? The answer lives in the word sees. What can be seen depends on signals, and signals are ruled by horizons. Outside, the last light from the traveler is redshifted to nothing. The observer's future contains endless echoes that never include a postcard from beyond the line. Inside, the traveler's future is full. Events, distances, the whole book. The outside can model that interior with a different chart, an extended map that takes the mathematics seriously, even where eyes cannot follow, but it still won't receive a letter. Knowledge without communication is like knowing there's a room on the other side of a well-sealed door. Because the blueprint says so. The blueprint is right. The door is still shut. In cosmology, horizons carry similar moods with softer lighting. The particle horizon marks the farthest places that could have sent us light since our cosmic time began. The event horizon, if our expansion keeps easing faster, marks places whose messages will never reach us, not even if we wait forever. Neither is a wall in space. Each is a rule about when and whether. Time is braided into those rules. A distant galaxy might exist now in some abstract sense, but if its light can never reach us, its now and ours are not part of a shared conversation. In the child world language, we live in a room where some corners are forever separate in time, more than in space. Another breath. Let your tongue fall from the roof of your mouth. Relativity has a habit of turning simultaneous into a local word. Events that are at the same time for one observer are not necessarily at the same time for another, moving differently or dwelling in different gravity. This is not mischief. It's bookkeeping in our inside-out picture. It's why the parent's now at the horizon is not the child's now at the first glow. Each room keeps its own schedule. The doorframe makes sure the schedules fit without ever forcing them to match minute by minute. We can use a gentler metaphor. Two choirs singing the same hymn in neighboring chapels, separated by thick stone. Each choir holds its own tempo, its own rests, its own dynamic. A conductor with the building's blueprint might align the hymns on paper and notice that a downbeat here corresponds to a swell there. The choirs never hear each other. The blueprint still shows a consistent harmony. That's time inside and time outside, meeting at a seam. If you want a small, tactile feel for how coordinate time can play tricks, think of a map that uses polar coordinates around a pole. Right at the pole, the longitude label blows up. You can scroll any number and it wraps around on itself. Yet nothing physical is wrong with the ice beneath your feet. You just chose a chart that wasn't friendly to the pole. Similarly, the outside observer's time coordinate near the horizon can behave badly, stretching, freezing, without anything physically freezing for the traveler. Another chart, another set of labels flows smoothly. It's the same hill, a kinder map. There's kindness too in remembering that the present for a human isn't a razor-thin slice. It's a window, a few moments wide, where perception integrates and smooths. Your brain stitches a handful of heartbeats into a now that feels continuous. The universe may be doing something analogous at grand scales, stitching local now slices into a shared cosmic time for co-moving observers. It's not magic, it's averaging. Let that soften any urge to make now a blade. Another breath. In 2, 3, and out. 2. So what is the practical upshot for our bedtime question? Are we inside a black hole? It's this. Time talk depends on the room. If we are a bud inside a parent, our time is complete to us. We have a beginning that functions like a first chapter, not a tear before the preface. Our clocks are honest, our arrow points forward. The parent's outside time can be written on a sensible blueprint that accommodates our existence, but no beam of light, no particle, no whispered message crosses the seam to say hello. The only bridge is consistency, the matching ledgers at the doorframe. A skeptic might still ask, if crossing takes forever to see, does the child universe take forever to exist? Bedtime answer, existence isn't bestowed by distant spectators. It's lived locally. A kiss exists, whether or not a telescope, a million light years away, ever logs the photons. Inside, existence is the unfurling of proper time along world lines, our lives' threads. Outside, existence is the unfurling of other threads. A seam prevents them from knotting together. It doesn't deny either thread its reality. One last image for the pillow. Picture two hourglasses sharing a wooden frame back to back, their glass bulbs touching but sealed. You turn the frame, sand begins to flow in both, each in its own bulb, each measuring a time that makes sense within its glass. You can tap the wood and feel that both are part of one object. You cannot move grains from one bulb to the other. The shared wood is the seam, the sands are the local times. Each hourglass has a beginning, each runs on, neither grants or withholds the other's reality. A soft recap before we dim. Time is local and loyal. Horizons are rules about communication, not walls. Outside views can freeze an inside moment without stopping the inside's life. Cosmic time is a quilt-wide heartbeat. Personal time is the breath-paced room we live in. Arrows of time point forward inside a child universe, because the first page is simple and the later pages multiply with possibility. The seam between rooms aligns ledgers, not minutes. With that, the inside-out idea sounds less like a paradox and more like a duet. And breathe. Long and easy. One breath to begin. In 2, 3, and out. 2. Tonight we'll tuck the sharp corners of language under the quilt, because some of the words we lean on, edge, center, inside, outside, before, beginning, are kitchen tools, brought into a room where the furniture is made of geometry and conversation. They're useful until they're not, then they pinch. will smooth them. Start with edge. In daily life, edges are places you can point at. The rim of a bowl, the lip of a table, the last stair. If you keep walking, you fall off. In space-time, many edges are rules, not rims. A horizon is an edge, in that it separates who can talk to whom, but there is no cliff, no splintering plank. It's more like the line on a map that says, messages from beyond this curve will never arrive. Even though the land looks ordinary at the line itself, the universe's observable edge, the furthest light that has had time to reach us, is not the edge of the universe, it's an edge of our conversation. Wait a while, and new light arrives. Your conversational horizon grows. If late-time acceleration persists, there may also be a cosmic event horizon, a permanent conversational limit. Again, a rule, not a cliff. Now center. We love centers. Centers feel important. The center of a city, of a pie, of a room where people gather. But some surfaces are centerless from the inside. Stand on Earth and walk, walk, walk. You never find the center of the planet's surface by walking. On a balloon, dots drawn on the rubber spread apart as the balloon inflates. Ask any one dot for the center of expansion on the surface, and it can only shrug. The center lives in a dimension the dot doesn't inhabit. Our large-scale cosmos plays a similar tune. Everywhere is the center of its own observable patch. That's not a trick. It's a geometry that refuses to pick favorites. The question, where is the center of the universe, is a bit like, where's north of the North Pole? The words are fine. The request is another breath. Jaw easy, shoulders soften. The pair inside, outside is our main character tonight. In the cupboard sense, inside is smaller, within larger, teacup in cabinet, cabinet in kitchen, kitchen in house. In space-time, inside can mean causal interior, the set of events that can send messages to a certain region, or that must share a fate. The inside of a black hole is the set of places whose futures all include the center in a specific, inescapable way. The outside is the set of places with at least some paths that never must go there. No cupboards, just stories about which future is available. If our universe were inside a black hole in some parent chart, that inside would not be small, it would be complete to us. Our inside would include every place and time we could ever meet, which is what everything means from within a room. Language tangles us again with beyond, beyond the horizon, beyond the beginning, beyond space itself. These words smuggle in a container picture. Space as a box on a shelf, time as a ribbon. You can snip and then look behind the cut. But our best maps treat space and time as relationships that things have with each other, not as containers everything sits in. Asking, what is beyond everything, is like asking what is the color of silence. We understand the words, but the pairing pulls the mind into a place without footing. Bedtime answer. We can talk about other regions with their own relationships, stitched to ours by a seam that prevents conversation. We can talk about earlier relative to a local clock, but we are not obliged to picture a warehouse where boxes of universes sit on shelves. A pause. In 2, 3, and out. 2, 3. Even beginning can be too sharp. In many charts, our cosmic time has a first page. Call it 0, and asking before page 0, inside the child universe, is like asking for the chapter that precedes page 1, inside that very book. The binding is real. The book is complete. There may be another book in the same wooden frame, apparent collapse written in a different script, but the frame does not allow the pages to mingle. A gentler phrase than beginning is past boundary. No bang, no wall, no thunder, just there are no earlier pages in this volume. The same softening helps with singularity, which we already tucked under a blanket. Instead of a place where everything is infinite, we can say a place our classical map cannot be extended. If that map is a set of coordinates and equations, then some of its misbehavior is a coordinate singularity, a problem with labels, like longitude blowing up at the pole. Change the labels and the singularity dissolve. Other misbehaviors are real in the sense that no label change cures them, but even then there may be flares asking for new rules, Quantum texture bounce like pressure, not announcements of nature's self-destruction. Another pair that benefits from bedtime polish. Empty, nothing. Physics's vacuum is not a cold void of absolute nothingness. It's a state with properties, fluctuations, symmetries, a pressure-like character in certain models. Philosophical nothing is a different creature, and at midnight tends to wake the mind without feeding it. If you feel your shoulders rise at the word nothing, swap it for no earlier time in this chart, or no access across this horizon. These phrases are homely and precise. They let the body relax. Another breath. Let the brow smooth. Good. Even distance needs care. We have proper distance. How far now, if we froze expansion and co-moving distance? How many grid squares apart on the expanding quilt? We have angular diameter distance and luminosity distance, both honest, both different in a stretching room. When someone says that galaxy is receding faster than light, the kind reply is, its proper distance is increasing faster than 1 light year per year, because the space between us is growing. Nothing locally outruns light. Swapping verbs often helps, is carried apart, is kinder than is moving through. Here and now are tricksters too. Relativity makes now a local idea, a neighborhood agreement, not a cosmic decree. In quiet cosmology, we get a shared cosmic time by averaging over vast scales, over many little nows stitched together for co-moving observers. That's lovely and useful, but no single absolute now slices the whole quilt for all participants at once. If that feels unsettling, try this. Your personal now already isn't a knife edge. Your brain integrates a few heartbeats into a present. The cosmos might simply be doing something similar at scale, smoothing, averaging, harmonizing. A small, tactile image. Hold a globe. Trace a line of longitude with your finger to the North Pole. Longitudes blow up there. Every longitude meets every other. The labels misbehave. The ice does not. Much of our confusion about horizons and centers is like that. Words try to label a place where their grammar isn't friendly. When the label snarls, it's kinder to change the label than to accuse the ice of being contradictory. Another. Picture a video game world, where exiting the right edge brings you in on the left. No wall, just a rule about coordinates. The character's map has no border. The programmer's map does. Both are true in their own sense. That's why we speak of charts and seams. One chart's edge is another chart's ordinary interior. The territory, the underlying geometry, doesn't change when we swap charts. Only our description does. A breath. In 2, 3, and out. 2, 3. We've leaned hard on analogies. Balloons, raisin bread, rivers, door frames, quilts. Analogies are bridges, not destinations. Each carries truth and smuggles in a flaw. Balloons suggest an outside we can look at, which our surface dots can't. Raisin bread suggests dough everywhere, which is fine, but raisins drift and rotate in ways galaxies don't when tied to the co-moving grid. Rivers suggest flow through space, when what we mean is flow of space-time. The cure isn't to ban analogies, it's to rotate them, the way you rotate a kaleidoscope, never letting one become an idol. If a metaphor tenses your shoulders, set it down and pick up a gentler one. We can also turn down the volume on ownership words. Phrases like, the universe has space, or black holes have insides, make space sound like stuff and horizons like furniture. Try space is a set of relations. A horizon defines a relation. Relations are calmer than possessions. They carry less drama and more grammar. A skeptic, always welcome, might say, isn't this just wordplay? The physics doesn't care about our lullabies. True, the equations don't blink, but we do. Language is how we carry equations through the nervous system at midnight. If the words we choose trigger startle reflex more than understanding, we're rehearsing fear, not insight. Choosing gentler, truer words is not decoration, it's accuracy with kindness. Another breath. Jaw floats. Tongue rests. Good. Let's fold these language tools back into our central wondering. Is our universe inside a black hole? If we keep cupboard words, The question pinches everything inside. Something sounds contradictory. If we swap in causal words, the question relaxes. Could our observable region be a causal interior that in another chart arises from collapse? Suddenly the idea is intelligible, even testable in mood horizons, as ledgers, beginnings as past boundaries, edges as conversation rules, centers as symmetry, not proven true, merely permitted, perhaps even aesthetically consonant with the sky we see. A tiny exercise for the pillow. Pick a sharp phrase that buzzes in your mind. Edge of space, before time, outside the universe. Whisper it once. Notice the body's micro flinch. Now swap it. Limit of communication. No earlier in this clock. Elsewhere, with no exchange. Whisper again. Feel the difference? Undunning is a physical act. It lives in muscles too. One last image for the pillow. Imagine a coastline in fog. A sign says end of trail, painted by someone who walked only on sunny days. You keep walking slowly and find a gentle boardwalk continuing into the mist. The land did not end where the sign claimed. The sign's jurisdiction ended. Physics often inherits signs from earlier maps. Our task is to read them kindly, obey them where they keep us safe, question them where they were put up by someone who hadn't yet seen the boardwalk, and breathe. Long, easy. A breath first, in 2, 3, and out. 2, 3. We've walked the geometry, listened to horizons count like librarians, and watched endings turn into passages. Now let's dim the desk lamp and lean back. What would it mean? Quietly, personally, philosophically, if our universe were inside a black hole, what does inside even do for us, as a word when the room is everything we can touch? Begin with meaning as a posture, not a prize. In daylight, meaning can feel like something to seize, a flag on a summit. At midnight, meaning is a way we stand in the world, shoulders down, breath slow, attention softened enough to notice. If inside names a causal room whose conversations are self-contained, then meaning is the tone we bring to the room we already inhabit. No postcard from beyond is required to bless our lives with significance. We are not waiting for a letter to tell us we are real. Another breath, jaw easy. The inside-out idea invites a tender humility. If our cosmos is a bud on a larger tree, our maps may always be local, our truths contextual. That isn't a demotion. It's a relief. It frees us from the anxious hunt for final words, the kind that pretend to cover all rooms at once. Instead, we can love accuracy with kindness. Statements that fit our sky, our scales, our senses, honest, within the horizons that define our conversations. We don't need to inflate our labels, to reach beyond a seam that won't pass notes. Our job is to be precise where we can be, gentle where we can't, and grateful either way. What then becomes of purpose? If beginnings are bounces, if endings are seams, if the tree bears many buds, does that make us small? Yes, and safely so. Smallness here is not an insult, it's a permission slip. In a garden with many flowers, no single bloom apologizes for not being the whole garden. Purpose shrinks from grand edicts and grows into attention to one another, to the slow architectures of kindness, to the craft of understanding the room we have. Whether or not some parent realm exists, breakfast still wants making, friends still want listening, curiosity still wants feeding. Meaning, like light, is local and loyal. Another breath, in, 2, 3, and out. 2, 3. You might feel a tug from the old puzzle. If seams seal, if rooms are complete to themselves, doesn't that feel lonely? It can, until we notice how conversation works inside the room we do have. Across centuries, minds braid their thoughts. Across meters, hands pass cups. Across millimeters, neurons exchange ions in patterns that become lullabies like this one. The universe is not stingy with connection within its room. The lack of contact with the beyond isn't isolation. It's a boundary that protects coherence. Rooms don't weaken meaning, they concentrate it. Here's a parallel that sits well at night. Think of a library with private reading rooms. The door frames keep ledgers. Rooms are quiet. Readers don't shout between walls. Each room holds worlds, novels, and proofs, and memories, complete to its occupants. The existence of adjacent rooms doesn't rob any one room of story. It multiplies the possibilities of story in general. If our cosmos is one such room, we are not missing anything essential by not hearing the next room's whispers. The book in our hands is enough to live by. Language likes to swerve toward ultimate answers. A gentle correction. Neuroscience and cosmology both teach us that many why questions hide a how question and a who question. How did this structure arise? Who is asking? And what do they need from an answer? In a bud universe, how becomes by rules that keep consistent ledgers at seams and kind clocks inside. Who becomes beings with nervous systems that calm when edges are rules and beginnings are past boundaries. We can let ultimate be replaced by appropriate answers scaled to our needs and our reach. Another breath. Let your shoulders melt a notch. There's a soft ethical echo here. If we live in a room whose ledger is finite, a cosmic horizon that caps the total ways information can be arranged, then extravagance becomes awe rather than entitlement. Every arrangement we actually make, every pattern in brain, culture, craft, occupies a tiny fraction of what our room allows. Wonder follows. Care follows. You don't drop a violin when you realize there are only so many playable notes. You hold it more carefully and play. The inside-out picture also reframes the anthropic itch, without fuss. Instead of declaring, we exist because the universe was tuned for us, we can whisper, we're the kinds of beings who wake up in rooms where waking up is possible, in a tree with many buds. Not provably, just perhaps the rooms with hospitable recipes will also be the rooms with readers to notice. That's neither boast nor doom. It's selection by possibility. It replaces grand necessity with quiet plausibility and lets gratitude into the space where certainty once sat. Another breath. In and out. Let's talk about mystery, but lower the volume. Mystery need not be a thundercloud at the edge of the map. It can be an unlit courtyard within the city walls, a place we can walk toward when we're ready, lanterns in hand, steps slow, voices low. The inside-out idea keeps mystery in a kindly range. We say, here is what our equations sing clearly, here are the notes they squeak, here are the places we suspect the instrument itself changes, where quantum and curve learn a duet we haven't fully practiced. That admission is not defeat, it is a discipline of wonder. And what of self in such a world? If space can bounce and time can be local, what does it mean to be me? A bundle of hours, a flicker of attention, a soft answer. The self is a pattern that persists long enough to care. It's what a brain does when it keeps a thread through changing moments. This is my breath, my memory, my hand on the mug. Patterns require stability to survive. Rooms like ours, quietly expanding, gently law-abiding, are hospitable to patterns that learn and love. Whether or not a parent star collapsed somewhere else, the pattern called you is this room's good fortune. A skeptic, our friendly night companion, might ask, is this just a trick of words to make us feel better? We can thank the skeptic and offer this. The comfort here is a byproduct of getting the grammar right. When edges are rules of conversation, fear loses a purchase. When beginnings are past boundaries, panic over nothingness loses its drama. When information lives on surfaces and ledgers match across seams, dread of loss softens into respect for accounting. Accuracy makes room for ease. Another breath. Jaw slackens. Tongue rests from the roof of the mouth. There's a small, actionable wisdom in the notion that inside is enough. If our meaning doesn't depend on exporting messages across a seam that won't transmit them, then our most honest work is local generosity. Attention, craft, care, curiosity, cleanup. We can treat comprehension not as conquest, but as hospitality, inviting perplexing facts into our home and giving them a seat at the table until they make sense. A civilization can be judged by how it treats the unknown in the room it already shares, not by how loudly it shouts into rooms it cannot reach. The inside-out lens also tempers our appetite for spectacle. When you learn that horizons grow by area, that ledgers keep steady books, that bridges are more often dictionaries than tunnels, fireworks become less interesting than fit, the way ideas snug together without gaps. Fit is quiet, fit is the click of a well-made drawer. Much of science's beauty is this click, a theory that explains many things with few adjustable parts, a map whose seams don't pucker when you lay it flat. The inside-out story is valuable not because it promises drama, but because it pursues fit across what used to be separate rooms. Another breath. In 2, 3, and out. 2. Shall we speak of finitude as a gift? If our room carries a finite ledger, then our lives, always finite, are not outliers, but rhymes. Endings shape attention. Knowing any given night won't last makes it easier to savor the night you have. Cosmology, approached gently, doesn't flatten meaning. It tunes it. The scale of things invites tenderness toward the small. A child's laugh beside a window becomes more, not less significant against a sky that may be one room among many. You may wonder about faith, not in equations, but in the human habit of leaning into what can't be proved. The inside-out idea doesn't cancel that leaning. It offers it a measured place to stand. Believe, if you like, that reality is larger than any room, but act, if you can, as though the room you're in is sacred enough to merit your best attention. These positions aren't enemies. They share a practice gratitude scaled to reach. Another breath. Let the breath grow shallow and easy. We can also rethread responsibility through the story. If horizons keep ledgers, then nothing we do is lost to the room's accounting, not in the moralistic sense, but in the physical. Patterns persist, consequences propagate, information rearranges, but doesn't wink out. A kind act doesn't erase a cruel one. Both write to the ledger. This can sober and comfort in the same motion. The universe is a remembering place. Make things worth remembering. There's a gentle tactic for restless nights. Trade why me for what now. In a bud universe, why me cannot be answered from a beyond, because postcards don't cross, but what now belongs entirely to the room. Drink water, breathe, send a kind message, rest. Scale helps. When a thought sprawls to impossible size, shrink it to a task that can be finished inside a breath or two. Cosmology is mindfulness. We practice living within our horizons. Another breath, in and out. A final philosophical kindness. Contradictions versus paradoxes. A contradiction breaks a rule. A paradox asks for a better description. Everything is inside something felt like a contradiction when inside meant cupboards. When inside means causal interior, the sting fades. The inside-out idea is a paradox only insofar as it pushes us to update our language. Once we do, it becomes a plausible mood, a lens among lenses. Paradox resolved, curiosity intact. One last image before we drift. A night train crossing a border you cannot see. Inside the carriage the light is warm. Pages turn, someone hums. Outside, snowfields slide past. And beyond them, other towns. The border does its quiet work. Laws change, languages turn, but the train's life is continuous. The tea is sweet, the book is good. You don't need to stand between cars at midnight to prove the border exists. You live inside the carriage fully. The world is larger than your window, and exactly the size of your window at once. A soft recap for the pillow. Meaning can be local and loyal. Rooms aren't prisons. Their coherences. Horizons protect conversation. Ledgers remember. Beginnings are past boundaries, not abysses. Mystery remains, but its volume is turned down to a human level. Humility, gratitude, attention. These are not consolation prizes. When postcards won't cross, they are the appropriate responses to being awake in any honest room. And breathe. Long, easy. A breath first. In 2, 3, and out. 2, 3. Let your jaw soften. Let your shoulders unhook from the day. We've wandered far and quietly, through horizons that count like librarians, through bounces that turn endings into passages, through rooms where time is local and loyal. Now we circle back, the way a tide comes home. Hold for a moment. The first image we shared, a lake at night, somewhere beneath the surface. A bubble rises and becomes a widening ring. From above, it is a brief ripple, and then stillness. From within, it is a world with a first shoreline and a sky to learn. Tonight we asked gently whether our universe could be such a ring, an opening born on the far side of a seam. We didn't claim, we cradled. We let the night make space for perhaps another breath. In 2, 3, and out. 2. Along the way we softened sharp words. Edge became a rule of conversation. Inside became a causal room, complete to its occupants. Singularity became a note on an old map that asks us to draw with kinder tools. We met horizons as doorframes keeping perfect ledgers. We let area do the counting where our kitchen sense expected volume. We imagined bridges not as tunnels for tourists, but as dictionaries that make 2 stories match at a seam. We listened for fingerprints in the oldest light, whispers rather than watermarks. We remembered that time hums in local clocks, and that 2 choirs can sing the same song in neighboring chapels without ever hearing each other, yet still be in harmony on the blueprint. None of this demanded certainty. The night is well suited to careful maybes. Our task was to line up the pieces until they fit, that quiet click of a well-made drawer. Where the fit was loose, we said so. Where it was snug, we let the snugness reassure without shouting. A soft scan now, from crown to toes, forehead smooth, eyes heavy, jaw loose, tongue resting from the roof of the mouth. The back of the neck warm, shoulders drifting a finger width lower, arms quietly heavy, breath like a small tide. If sleep wants to arrive mid-sentence, let it, the universe will not take offense. If you're still awake, keep a few tender pictures for the pillow. A snow globe without glass. Galaxies drifting apart because space itself stretches, not because anyone is pushing them. There's no rim to tap, only a rule about who can send a postcard to whom. Somewhere far, a cosmic horizon that is less a wall than a librarian's note. Shelves beyond this sign are for another room. A tapestry for a horizon, threads too fine to see. Yet they keep the book of what has brushed by. When something crosses in the parent world, the seam's pattern changes. Inside, an entire history unfolds, and the seam's ledgers still match the story in both rooms. A night train on quiet rails, crossing borders you cannot see. Inside the carriage, tea and pages and lamp glow. Outside, fields pass, and distant lights. You can sense the world is larger than your window. You can also live content within the window you have. Both are true. Another breath, in and out. We also asked what any of this might mean for living, here and now. If rooms are self-contained, meaning isn't borrowed from a beyond. It's made by attention and care inside the room you inhabit. If ledgers, remember, then everything matters. Gently, not heavily. A kind word doesn't vanish. A patient minute doesn't evaporate. Patterns persist. The universe is a remembering place. And if our room is one bud among many, that doesn't diminish us. It lets us love smallness without apology. Breakfast still wants making. A plant still wants water. Curiosity still wants feeding. Wonder is not an award for finishing the map. It's the posture that lets us keep walking. Lantern low, feet slow. Now, one last little review. Soft as rain on a roof. Black holes are not monsters, but rooms with unusual acoustics. Horizons are rules of return. Inside can be vast. The universe model is a stretching quilt with a simple heartbeat, smooth on the whole, lively in detail. The inside-out idea says, collapse there could be birth here, stitched by a seam that keeps perfect books. Information lives on edges more than we expected. Area keeps the tally. Singularities are places our old map ends. Gentler rules may replace cliffs with stairs. Bounces and bridges can be turns and translations rather than fireworks and tunnels. The sky's quiet. It's near Gaunia's hush. Its smooth early pages sits comfortably with a calm beginning. Time is local and loyal. 2 choirs, 2 tempos, 1 consistent blueprint. Language can pinch. We traded blades for rules and cupboards for conversations. Meaning didn't shrink. It settled close enough to touch. A few more breaths, lengthening the out-breath just a little, in 2, 3, and out. 2, 3, 4. Let the bed feel larger than your outline. Let the mind set down the last of its day bundles. If sleep arrives, allow it to carry the lantern. If wakefulness lingers, rest anyway. Rest is a kind of physics we do on purpose. Thank you for sharing this quiet wander with Midnight Sleep Scientist. If you found comfort here and you're still awake, you're welcome to leave a gentle note about where you're listening from tonight. Our sleepy world map grows by whispers, and if you feel like returning for another drift on another night, you'll always have a place here. No urgency, no hurry. One last image to carry with you, a curtain lit from behind. On its thin surface, a whole story moves, shapes and gestures that are enough to make meaning. The lantern behind it may be larger than the scene it paints. That doesn't make the dance less real. Your life is that dance. This room is enough. Breathe and sleep well.